When I drove up to the house, I saw a courier car outside the house, and at the entrance my wife's clothes were taken off and the courier's men's uniform, and when I went into the bedroom, I was shocked. Now I will tell you everything from the beginning. I've always thought I was a simple man, maybe too simple. I work hard, come home to my wife, Alice, and try to make her happy. We've been together for over a decade, and in that time, I thought I knew every inch of her, every quirk, every little detail. I never imagined there'd come a day where I'd be blindsided by her, of all people. Alice has always loved shopping. She says it's retail therapy, and even though I think it's mostly a waste of money, I never minded. If a new pair of shoes or some gadget brought her a little happiness, who was I to judge? So, when she started ordering things more frequently online, I figured it was just her way of coping with the stress. I've been pulling longer hours at the office, especially these past few months. She knew why. My goal was to save enough to finally get that lake cabin we'd always dreamed of. I thought she was on board with the plan. Then came the delivery guy. I didn't think much of it at first. I'd be at work, and Alice would text me that something else had arrived. A new coffee maker, throw pillows, perfume. I'd get a little picture from her showing off the goodies, usually with a playful smile and a "look what we got." It made me feel a little closer to her, even if I wasn't around as much. I always smiled at the pictures, relieved that she didn't seem to mind my late nights at the office. But the texts started to come less often, and her photos, her little glimpses into her day, stopped too. I chalked it up to my own imagination at first, thinking maybe I was just missing her more. But every time I came home, there was always a package sitting in the foyer, another delivery to add to the growing collection. One night, after a grueling 14-hour shift, I got home to find Alice already asleep. I collapsed onto the couch, intending to just catch my breath, when I noticed something. A delivery receipt poking out from under a pile of catalogs on the coffee table. It had today's date and time, right around when I'd normally be at work. The courier's name caught my eye, Jack. Strange that his name was handwritten on the receipt. I picked up my phone, glanced through our texts, and realized she hadn't mentioned this particular delivery to me. I brushed it off at first. Just a receipt. Just some random guy's name. But somehow, it didn't sit right. The next day, I casually asked about the receipt, making it sound like a passing joke. "You keeping a record of all our packages now?" I grinned, trying to sound playful. She froze. Just for a fraction of a second, but it was there. A brief pause, a moment where she seemed to forget how to act natural. "Oh, you know me," she laughed, a little too loudly. "I'm a stickler for details." I let it go. But from that moment, I couldn't shake the feeling that something was off. It was in the way she avoided looking at me directly, the way her voice quivered ever so slightly when she laughed. Maybe it was all in my head, I told myself. Maybe I was just being paranoid. But the feeling lingered, festering inside me. That week, I decided to keep track of things, paying closer attention to the delivery receipts. Jack's name showed up more frequently than seemed natural. On my way to work, I even caught a glimpse of him on our street once, his uniformed frame chatting with Alice at the door, just a little too close for comfort. The way she leaned toward him, her smile. I'd never seen her look at me like that, not in years. The days passed in a dull, throbbing ache. I felt my heart sink a little more with every interaction they shared, every half-innocent gesture that seemed to hold something deeper. I wasn't just seeing things. No, something was happening. And every night when I lay next to her in bed, I'd stare at the ceiling, wondering how I could confirm it without pushing her away entirely. Then, one afternoon, I left work early, claiming a stomach bug. I pulled up a few houses down from ours, my heart pounding in my chest, feeling more like a thief than a husband. My pulse roared in my ears, drowning out any coherent thoughts. And as I sat there, gripping the steering wheel, I saw him. He stood at our front door, holding a package. She answered, glancing around as if making sure no one was watching, before she ushered him inside. It was the middle of the day, and here I was, parked outside my own home, watching my wife smile and laugh with another man as he crossed the threshold. I waited. Minutes felt like hours, each second an eternity as I fought the urge to storm in, to demand answers. But something in me held back. told me to let it play out. After what felt like a lifetime, he left, nodding at her as he sauntered back to his truck. I could see her silhouette in the doorway, watching him drive away. And that's when I knew. The woman I loved, the woman I had shared my life with, was keeping secrets from me. The kind that could destroy everything we'd built together. I went back to work, my head spinning. Every memory, every promise we'd made felt like a lie. That night, I sat at the dinner table with her, watching her as she laughed and joked as if everything was perfectly normal. She didn't know that I'd seen. She didn't realize that her mask was slipping. In that moment, I resolved to get to the bottom of it. I couldn't confront her, not yet. I needed proof. I needed to understand exactly what was going on and why she decided to bring a stranger into our lives, into our home, while I was out there working to make a better life for us. Whatever was happening, I would find out, and once I had the truth, I'd decide what to do with it. For the next few days, I felt like a ghost drifting through my own life. Every morning, I'd get up, kiss her on the cheek like I always did, and head out to work, pretending I hadn't just spent another sleepless night beside her. I kept replaying the scene of her standing in the doorway with that courier, her soft laugh echoing in my mind. That laugh used to be for me. Each evening, I came home with the same question on my mind. Was this going to be the day she told me? Would she finally come clean, face me, and confess? But the truth never came. Instead, she played the perfect wife, asking me about my day, smiling at me across the dinner table, touching my hand like nothing was wrong. The duality of it all felt surreal, maddening even. I spent the night scrolling through delivery receipts and checking our security system, only to find, ironically, that she had disabled the cameras on the days he'd visited. Alice, my sweet and innocent wife, had thought of everything. She was covering her tracks. The care she took to deceive me burned like acid in my gut. I couldn't keep going in this limbo. It was time to act. The next day, I set a plan in motion. After calling in another sick day, I parked my car a few blocks away from home. As soon as I saw the courier truck pull up, I ducked down, hidden from view. Sure enough, Jack knocked on the door, carrying a small package, a meaningless prop, no doubt, in whatever twisted game they were playing. She opened the door, beaming at him like he was a long-lost friend, and within moments, he was inside. My heart pounded, but I forced myself to stay calm. Confronting them now, in the heat of anger, would only lead to more lies, more false apologies. I wanted her to feel the depth of betrayal she was inflicting on me, to see what it felt like to have everything she thought was secure pulled out from under her. No, I wasn't going to give her the luxury of an argument and a swift exit. This betrayal required something far more patient. I pulled out my phone, snapping a few pictures of them together through the partially open front window, feeling a strange sense of satisfaction with each one. Her expressions told me everything I needed to know. The way she touched his arm, her coy smile, her lips just barely parted. I'd been around her long enough to know her every signal, every little move she made when she was attracted to someone. I used to be the one who could read her like that. Now it felt like I was watching a stranger. When he finally left, I slipped away, heading back to the office and diving into work, the only distraction that kept me from driving myself crazy. By the time I got home that night, I had the evidence I needed, the text messages, photos, all meticulously saved and organized on a hidden folder in my phone. I wasn't sure what I'd do with it yet, but just having it, holding on to the truth, gave me a strange sense of control. I wanted to confront her that night, to throw every ugly fact I'd gathered in her face and watch her squirm under the weight of her lies. But as I watched her move around the kitchen, her laughter ringing out as she recounted a story from work, I felt something unexpected, a hollow, aching sadness. She had no idea how fragile our life was, how close everything was to shattering. Then, her phone buzzed on the counter, and I knew it was him even before I glanced down at the screen. "What's got you smiling so big over there?" I asked casually, hoping I didn't sound as bitter as I felt. "Oh, just something funny I saw online," she replied, a little too quickly, turning the screen away from me as she slipped it into her pocket. I could see her pulse beating wildly at her neck. She knew she was being careless, and the look in her eyes was tinged with just a hint of guilt. That moment, watching her fumble through a lie, I realized how truly gone she was. The woman who used to look at me with such admiration, who once promised me forever, had replaced me with some stranger who brought her packages and cheap thrills while I was out building our life. I didn't want her to see me break, so I left the room, mumbling some excuse about needing fresh air. Outside, I stood on the porch, looking out into the darkness, my mind racing with ideas I never thought I'd entertain. If she was capable of such betrayal, maybe I was capable of revenge. A thought struck me then, and I found myself smiling, a cold, humorless smile. I was going to take away the one thing she valued most, her comfort. Alice thought she could play both sides, keep her life with me while indulging in some reckless affair on the side. She wanted everything, but I'd make sure she ended up with nothing. Over the next few days, I began putting the final pieces of my plan into place. I started slowly, making changes to our bank accounts, quietly rerouting our savings to a new account in my name only. I made subtle shifts with our bills and credit cards, little things she wouldn't notice right away, but that would add up over time. I went through every shared asset, every account, every insurance policy, carefully disentangling our lives behind the scenes. She wouldn't even realize what was happening until it was too late. The more I planned, the colder and more calculated I became. The sadness and anger that had once eaten me alive began to fade, replaced by a steely determination. I was no longer the husband who had loved her, who would have done anything to make her happy. Now, I was the man who would watch her unravel, who would make her feel the weight of every lie, every betrayal, until she had nothing left to hide behind. It was a strange feeling, knowing that I was building towards something, that every small action, every hidden change I made would bring me closer to the final act. But for now, I kept it hidden, playing the dutiful husband while preparing to dismantle everything she took for granted. Then, just as I was nearing the end of my preparations, I caught her slipping out of the house in the middle of the day. I'd taken the week off work, making up some excuse about needing to recharge, and she had no idea I was at home. I watched as she left, dressed more carefully than usual, with a nervous glance over her shoulder as she hurried down the steps. I waited a few moments, then grabbed my keys, following her at a safe distance. She drove a short distance, just a few blocks over, to a small, out-of-the-way motel I'd almost forgotten existed. I parked out of sight, waiting as she met him out front, laughing as he took her hand and led her inside. That was it. There it was. Every doubt, every hesitation I'd ever had was extinguished in that moment, replaced by a strange, quiet resolve. The love we'd once shared was a distant memory now, and I knew what I had to do. By the time she returned home that evening, flushed and glowing, I was ready. I welcomed her with a smile, offering to make dinner, letting her relax as if nothing had changed. She had no idea that this, here, now, was the beginning of her end. The next few days were a test of endurance. I watched her closely, my every word and gesture carefully measured, all while hiding a cold anger that sat like a lead weight in my chest. The woman who stood across from me was a stranger, someone capable of deception so deep that I hardly recognized her. She thought she was safe, that her lies would remain hidden in the shadows. But I was ready now, and it was time for her to pay. That weekend, I invited a few friends over for a small get-together. Alice loved playing the perfect hostess, and I knew she'd seize the opportunity to put on a show. She prepared appetizers, set out wine glasses, and slipped into a dress that used to make my heart race. I watched her flit around the house, playing the part of a loving wife, and the irony was almost laughable. Our friends arrived, and we fell into the usual small talk, exchanging stories and laughing over old memories. But beneath the laughter, I was watching her. Every smile, every laugh felt hollow now, an echo of the woman she used to be. I almost felt sorry for her. Almost. After dinner, when everyone was settled in with drinks, I took a deep breath and made my move. "So, Alice," I said, a slight smile on my face as I leaned back, "have you told everyone about our plans yet?" She blinked, caught off guard, but quickly recovered. "Our plans?" she asked, glancing at me with a look of confusion. "Which plans?" "Oh, you know." I smiled wider, keeping my voice light. The change is coming to our lives. I thought you'd be excited to share it with everyone here. She stared at me, visibly trying to piece together what I was hinting at. I could see the flicker of panic in her eyes as she tried to understand. The room fell quiet, our friends watching, intrigued by this unexpected turn. Come on, Alice, I coaxed, holding her gaze. Why don't you tell them all about your new interests? The color drained from her face, and for the first time in our marriage, I saw genuine fear in her eyes. I don't know what you're talking about, she stammered, laughing nervously, trying to shrug it off. Oh, I think you do, I said, my tone sharpening ever so slightly. It's okay. Don't be shy. We're all friends here. Why don't you tell everyone about Jack? At the mention of his name, she froze. She swallowed hard, her face paling as the silence stretched painfully. Our friends shifted uncomfortably, sensing the tension but not yet understanding. Jack? Who's Jack? One of our friends asked, looking between us with a mix of confusion and curiosity. Alice tried to laugh it off, her voice shaking. Oh, it's just someone, a delivery guy who drops off packages. Nothing worth mentioning. I raised an eyebrow, feigning surprise. Nothing worth mentioning? That's funny because I'd say the two of you seem to be very close. Isn't that right, Alice? I held up my phone, displaying one of the photos I'd taken through the window, a clear shot of her and Jack standing far too close for comfort. The image of her, looking up at him with that familiar, intimate smile, flashed across the screen. A murmur rippled through the room, and Alice's face twisted into a mask of horror. I'd stripped away her carefully constructed illusion in a single move, exposing the ugly truth for everyone to see. What is this? One of our friends gasped, staring at her, eyes wide with disbelief. Alice's mouth opened and closed, her hands trembling as she struggled to find the words. But there was nothing she could say. She was trapped, cornered, her lies unraveling under the harsh light of the truth. It's not what it looks like, she stammered, her voice barely above a whisper. Please, just listen. Not what it looks like? I repeated, laughing coldly. I think it's exactly what it looks like, Alice. Why don't you explain to everyone here why you've been inviting a stranger into our home? Why you've been sneaking off to meet him behind my back? She shot me a pleading look, her eyes welling with tears. Please, let's talk about this in private. Oh, now you want privacy? I replied, unable to keep the bitterness out of my voice. That's funny, considering how little privacy you seemed to need when he was here. She flinched, the words hitting her like a physical blow. I could see the tears spilling over now, running down her cheeks as she realized just how thoroughly trapped she was. I wanted to feel satisfied, to feel some sense of justice, but all I felt was a hollow ache. The woman I had loved, the woman I'd given my life to, was gone, replaced by this stranger who would betray me without a second thought. Our friends sat in stunned silence, watching as she broke down in front of them, the weight of her own lies crashing down on her. Please, John, she choked out, reaching for my hand. I'm so sorry. It was a mistake, a terrible, stupid mistake. I never meant for it to go this far. I pulled my hand back, avoiding her touch. Don't touch me, I said coldly, the words cutting through her like a knife. You made your choice, Alice. Now you get to live with it. For a long moment, she stared at me, her face crumpling with pain and desperation. I'll do anything, she whispered, her voice breaking. Please, don't leave me. I know I messed up, but we can fix this. We can get through this, I promise. I love you. The words sounded hollow, meaningless, a desperate attempt to cling to the life she'd shattered. I couldn't even look at her without feeling a sick twist of anger and betrayal. Love? I scoffed, shaking my head. If this is love, I don't want any part of it. I turned to our friends, who were still watching, eyes wide and mouths agape. Sorry for the show, I said, my voice steady but cold. I think it's time for you all to go. One by one, they filed out, murmuring awkward goodbyes, casting pitying glances at Alice as they left. She was still sobbing, crumpled on the floor, as I shut the door behind them, leaving the two of us alone in the silence. She looked up at me, her face streaked with tears, and reached out, her voice trembling. "Please, John, don't end it like this. Give me a chance to make it right." The anger I'd been holding back surged to the surface. "A chance?" I spat, taking a step toward her. "You've had all the chances in the world, Alice, and you threw them away. You thought you could keep this hidden, that you could lie to me and get away with it. You betrayed me in our own home. For God's sake." She sobbed harder, clutching at her chest like she was physically pained. I know, but it was a mistake. It was stupid, and it didn't mean anything, I swear." "That's what you think?" I said, my voice laced with contempt. "It didn't mean anything? You think that makes it better? That somehow that makes this betrayal less real?" She looked down, unable to meet my eyes, and in that moment, I realized how pathetic she looked, how small and broken. The woman who'd once been my partner, my confidant, was reduced to this sniveling shell, begging me for forgiveness she hadn't earned. "I'm done, Alice," I said, my voice finally steady. "You're not the woman I thought you were, and I can't spend another day in this lie of a marriage. You made your choice, and now, so have I." Her face crumpled, the realization hitting her with a finality that left no room for argument. "John, please," she whispered, but her voice was already fading, like the last flicker of a dying flame. I took a step back, staring at her one last time, a mixture of anger and pity swirling in my chest. This woman, who had once been my world, was now just a stranger who destroyed everything we'd built together. Without another word, I turned and walked away, leaving her alone in the empty silence of our broken home. The next few days passed in a blur, a strange mixture of liberation and grief. I'd finally made my decision, confronted her, and watched her shatter under the weight of her own lies. But that didn't make it easy. A decade of marriage doesn't just disappear overnight, no matter how much anger you feel. There were moments when I felt almost hollow, like I'd lost a part of myself I'd never get back. Alice tried everything to fix things. She left me tearful voicemails, texted long apologies that rambled about how much she missed me, how she couldn't bear the thought of life without me. But it all felt too little, too late. Each word was like salt in a wound, a reminder of how easily she had lied, how effortlessly she had betrayed everything we had. I wasn't interested in forgiveness. I was focused on closure, and I wanted to make sure she felt every consequence of her actions. After all, she'd taken her time to carefully hide her betrayal, thinking she could keep both me and her affair under control. But life didn't work that way, and now she was learning the hard way. The first part of my plan was already in motion. I'd moved our joint finances into a separate account under my name, a step she was probably only just discovering. When I hadn't heard from her for a couple of days, I figured she'd finally notice the changes. I wasn't just taking our shared savings. No, I wanted her to feel the financial impact. She would be forced to see, in cold, hard numbers, what it felt like to lose everything she thought she could take for granted. On the 5th day after our friends had witnessed the collapse of our marriage, she showed up at my office unannounced. I was on my lunch break, nursing a coffee and trying to ignore the headache pounding at my temples, when my assistant called through the intercom. "John, your wife Alice is here," she said awkwardly. There was a long pause before she added, "Should I let her in?" I sighed, glancing around the office, weighing my options. Part of me wanted to tell her to leave, but something made me pause. I was tired of the constant phone calls, the messages, the empty apologies. Maybe it was time for a final conversation, a chance to put an end to this chapter once and for all. "Send her in," I replied, my voice clipped. A moment later, Alice walked in, looking smaller and more vulnerable than I'd ever seen her. She clutched her purse tightly, her eyes red and puffy from crying. As she sat down across from me, she bit her lip, trying to hold back tears. "John," she whispered, barely able to meet my gaze. "Please, I know I messed up. I know I hurt you. But I'm begging you, can we find a way to move past this?" I studied her for a long moment, her face a mask of regret and desperation. But all I felt was a cold detachment, an emptiness that refused to be moved by her sorrow. "Move past this?" I repeated slowly, leaning forward. You mean, pretend that you didn't betray me? That you didn't sneak around behind my back with some random delivery guy, bringing him into our home? She flinched, the words landing with a brutal finality. I know it sounds terrible, but it wasn't. It wasn't serious, John. It didn't mean anything. It was a mistake, just a mistake. You keep calling it a mistake, I said, my voice tinged with bitterness. But it wasn't just one moment, was it? It was every lie, every time you welcomed him into our home. You don't get to call that a mistake, Alice. That was a choice. She started to speak, but I cut her off. Did you think you could keep everything hidden? That you could just lie to my face every day, and I'd be too stupid to notice? I leaned back, feeling the weight of my words settle into the silence between us. Or maybe you didn't even care if I found out. Maybe you thought you'd get away with it either way. Alice's face twisted with regret, and she reached out a hand, trembling as she tried to touch mine. Please, John, she whispered. I know you're angry. I know you hate me right now, but we can fix this. I can change. I'll do anything you ask, I swear. I pulled my hand away, unable to stomach the sight of her pleading face. You think you can just undo this? That there's some magical fix that'll make everything go back to the way it was? I shook my head, laughing bitterly. No, Alice. There's no coming back from this. Not for you, and not for us. She slumped back, defeated, tears streaming down her face as she tried to piece together a response. But there was nothing left to say. The truth had already torn us apart, and nothing she said could rebuild the life she destroyed. Please, John, just one more chance, she whispered, her voice cracking with desperation. I'll leave my job. I'll cut off all contact with him. I'll do whatever it takes. Please, don't throw away everything we've built. I looked at her, feeling a strange sense of satisfaction mixed with sadness. The thing is, Alice, you already threw it away. You decided that your mistake was worth more than our marriage. And now, you get to live with the consequences. She choked back a sob, her hands trembling as she wiped her tears. Is there anything I can do? Anything at all? I paused, considering her words, weighing my next move. Actually, there is something, I said slowly, feeling the gears of my plan turning. You can sign these. I reached into my drawer and pulled out a set of documents, sliding them across the desk toward her. She stared at them, confused, before realizing what they were. Divorce papers, she whispered, her face going pale. Not just any divorce papers, I said calmly. These will leave you with nothing. No money, no assets. Just a clean slate and the chance to start over, alone. She gasped, clutching the papers with shaking hands. John, please, you can't do this. We built this life together. You can't just take everything away from me. I leaned back, watching her with cold satisfaction. Actually, I can. Consider it a consequence of your mistake. You wanted to play games, Alice? Now, you get to play by my rules. Her face crumpled, and she looked at me with a mixture of anger and sorrow. You're doing this to punish me, she accused, her voice raw. You're trying to ruin me because you can't forgive me. No, Alice, I replied, my voice steady. This isn't punishment. It's simply the reality you created. I'm just making sure you see it clearly. She sat there for a long time, staring at the papers, her shoulders slumped in defeat. And then, slowly, she picked up the pen, signing her name with trembling hands. Each signature felt like a nail in the coffin of our marriage, a final acknowledgement of everything she had thrown away. When she finished, she looked up at me one last time, her face etched with pain. I loved you, John, she whispered, barely audible. I still do. I held her gaze, feeling a cold satisfaction settle over me. If that were true, we wouldn't be here, Alice. But it's too late now. Goodbye. She stood slowly, clutching her purse, her eyes filled with regret and sorrow. Without another word, she turned and walked out of my office, leaving me alone with the silence that followed. As the door clicked shut behind her, I leaned back in my chair, feeling an overwhelming sense of finality. It was done. Our life together, our marriage, was over. She was finally gone, stripped of everything she thought she could keep while betraying me. I took a deep breath, letting the emptiness settle in. It wasn't exactly victory, but it was enough. She'd learned her lesson, and I, for the first time in months, felt free. Days turned into weeks, and I tried to settle into the new rhythm of my life. My mornings were quieter, the house seemed emptier, but for the first time, the silence felt welcome. There were no more late-night worries, no more glances at Alice's phone, no more wondering if every smile or laugh she shared was meant for someone else. I was alone, but I was finally free from the constant ache of betrayal. The divorce went through quickly, thanks to the papers she'd signed. She tried reaching out a few times afterward, texts, voice messages, even a letter, but I never replied. There was nothing left to say. I'd seen her desperation when she signed those papers, her realization that she'd gambled our life and lost. Knowing she was out there, stripped of the stability and comfort she'd taken for granted, was more closure than I could have asked for. One Friday night, I received a message from a mutual friend of ours, Alex, who still kept in touch with Alice on occasion. He wanted to meet for a drink, saying he had something he thought I should know. Part of me wanted to ignore it, to leave everything about Alice behind and move on. But curiosity got the better of me, and I found myself meeting him at a quiet bar on the edge of town. After the usual pleasantries, Alex leaned in, lowering his voice. "Look, John," he began, clearly uncomfortable. "I wouldn't bring this up if I didn't think you should know, but Alice isn't doing well." I raised an eyebrow, feeling a surge of mixed emotions. "Is that so?" He nodded, sighing heavily. After the divorce, she tried to stay in the house, but without any of the financial support, well, she lost it. She's been staying at a friend's place, but she's not herself. She's broken, John. I took a slow sip of my drink, processing his words. It was hard to imagine the woman who had torn my life apart now struggling to piece together her own. But somehow, it didn't fill me with satisfaction. If anything, it felt like a hollow victory. "And why are you telling me this?" Alex hesitated, his expression conflicted. "Maybe because part of me hoped you'd reach out to her. She's at rock bottom, John. She's lost almost everything." I took a deep breath, staring into my glass as I considered his words. Reaching out? To Alice? After everything? The thought seemed almost absurd. She'd made her choices, and now she was living with the consequences. Still, a part of me couldn't shake the memory of her face as she'd signed those divorce papers, the look of regret and sorrow as she walked out of my office. It had been real, at least in that moment. "John," Alex continued, breaking my train of thought, "I'm not saying you should take her back, but maybe she deserves a chance to explain herself. Closure, for both of you. Closure." I thought I'd already found it, but maybe he was right. Maybe hearing her side of the story could offer a kind of final peace. After a long pause, I finally nodded. "All right, Alex. I'll think about it." The next day, I decided to take a drive. I didn't have a destination in mind, but I found myself steering toward the coffee shop where Alice and I used to go every Saturday morning. It had been a small tradition for us, a quiet moment where we'd laugh, talk, and plan out our week. A lifetime ago, it seemed. As I walked in, my eyes scanned the room, taking in the familiar sights. The barista gave me a nod of recognition, but something else caught my attention. A woman sitting alone in a corner booth, hunched over a coffee cup. Alice. She looked worn, tired. Her once bright eyes dimmed. Her shoulders slumped. She was a shadow of the woman I'd once loved. I almost turned around and left, but something stopped me. Maybe it was curiosity, or maybe it was the lingering remnants of a love that had once been everything to me. I walked over, clearing my throat as I stopped in front of her table. She looked up, startled, and for a moment, her face lit up with something that looked like hope. "John," she whispered, her voice barely audible. I nodded, taking a seat across from her. "Alice." The silence stretched between us, thick with unspoken words and memories. She looked down at her hands, fidgeting nervously, before finally meeting my gaze. "Thank you for sitting with me." I stayed quiet, waiting for her to continue. She took a shaky breath, her voice trembling. "I know there's nothing I can say to make up for what I did. I don't expect forgiveness. I don't deserve it. But I need you to know, I never stopped loving you. The words hung in the air, and for a moment, I felt a pang of sadness, mingling with the anger that still simmered beneath the surface. If you loved me, Alice, why did you do it? Why throw everything away? She swallowed, her eyes filling with tears. I don't know. I was lonely, John. You were working all the time, and I felt invisible, like I was just part of the background. When Jack started paying attention to me, it was like I mattered again. I felt a surge of frustration, struggling to understand her logic. So you decided to betray me? To bring some stranger into our home? Her face crumpled, and she buried her face in her hands, sobbing quietly. I know how terrible it sounds. I was selfish, reckless. And now I've lost everything. I watched her, feeling a strange mixture of anger and pity. She was right. She'd lost everything. The life we'd built, the home we'd shared, the future we'd once dreamed of together. It was all gone, reduced to a pile of memories tainted by her choices. Alice, I said quietly, my voice steady, you destroyed our life because you needed to feel important. But the truth is, you were already everything to me. You didn't need anyone else to make you feel that way. She looked up at me, her face streaked with tears. I know that now, she whispered. I know, and it's too late. I ruined the one thing that mattered most. And I don't think I'll ever forgive myself. For a long moment, we sat in silence, two people bound by a love that had been shattered, broken beyond repair. I didn't know if I could ever forgive her, not fully. But as I looked at her, broken and lost, I felt a strange sense of release, as though I were finally letting go of the last pieces of anger that had kept me chained to the past. You're right, I said finally, my voice soft but resolute. It's too late for us. But maybe it doesn't have to be too late for you. Learn from this, Alice. Find a way to make something of your life again. She nodded, wiping her tears, a glimmer of hope in her eyes. Thank you, John. Thank you for everything. I stood up, feeling a weight lift from my shoulders. Goodbye, Alice. As I walked out of the coffee shop, I felt a strange sense of peace. She would live with her regrets, and I would live with mine. But we were free now, unshackled from the past, each with the chance to start anew. And as I stepped into the sunlight, breathing in the cool, crisp air, I realized that maybe this was the real closure I'd been searching for all along. Subscribe to the channel and like this story if you liked it. Turn on notifications so you don't miss new stories. Click on the playlist on the right to listen to previous stories. See you soon.